In August of 1998, the wheat country of the Oklahoma Panhandle turned the color of rust. Not gold, not brown, rust. A new stripe disease had moved north after a wet spring, and it did not move like a normal field problem. It ran on the wind. It climbed from one farm to the next. It stained the leaves orange, weakened the stems, and left entire fields standing upright, but already dead. By the second week of August, trucks were parked along county roads because farmers had stopped pretending there was anything to check. The wheat had no heads worth cutting. Some fields lost half their yield. Some lost nearly all of it. But 5 miles outside a town called Weller, behind a sagging fence and a wind-bent pump house, 67 acres were still green. Not perfect. There were infected leaves. There were thin patches. But the field was alive, in a place where everything around it had failed. The heads were heavy. The stems were holding. And the green was bright enough that people slowed down when they passed it. That field belonged to Ruth Calder. Ruth was 61 years old, widowed, and 3 payments behind on a farm that had been in her family since statehood. On the kitchen table that morning was a bank letter saying she owed $184,000 before winter. In the yard was a white sedan with Texas plates. 2 men stepped out wearing pressed shirts that did not belong in that dust. A woman followed them, carrying a leather folder. Ruth watched from the shade of the pump house and did not ask who they were. The older man introduced himself as Grant Hollis from Canyon Ridge Genetics. Then he said the sentence Ruth had already expected. "We're here about your wheat." Ruth looked past him, toward the green field. "No," she said. "You're here about the seed." Hollis opened the leather folder on an overturned feed tub. Inside was a purchase offer for full control of Ruth's seed line. The first number was $2.7 million. It was more money than Ruth had ever seen written in one place. Enough to clear the bank. Enough to replace every broken gate and cracked tire on the farm. Enough to make the winter stop being a threat. Hollis spoke gently, the way people speak when they think poverty has made the decision for you. "This disease is changing the season for everyone," he said. "Your plants are showing resistance. We can develop that. We can protect it. We can move fast." Ruth picked up the bank letter from the table beside the pump house, folded it once, and placed it under a wrench so the wind would not take it. She asked the only question that mattered. "What happens after you protect it?" Hollis said they would isolate the resistant traits, build them into commercial lines, license the seed, and recover the investment. Ruth nodded. "So the farmers buy it back?" No one answered quickly. The woman with the folder finally said, "That is how modern seed works." Ruth looked toward the pump house door. Inside, beneath a sheet of canvas, sat a cedar chest filled with cloth sacks of wheat seed. Some sacks had tags written by Ruth, some by her father. A few were so old the pencil marks had turned silver. Ruth opened the chest and lifted one small sack. Tag read 1919. "This seed was old before your company existed," she said. Hollis closed the folder halfway. "Mrs. Calder, this is a serious offer." "I know." "You could lose this farm." "I know that too." He studied her face, trying to find the place where fear would do its work. Ruth tied the sack closed again. "I'm not selling it," she said. Hollis stared at her. Then Ruth added the part none of them were ready for. "I'm going to share it." The seed in that cedar chest had not begun in Oklahoma. It had crossed an ocean inside a woman's coat. Ruth's great-grandmother, Lena Keller, arrived in Galveston in 1902 with 2 children, a cracked wedding ring, and a linen pouch stitched into the lining of her skirt. Inside the pouch was wheat from the Volga steppe, where her family had learned to farm under hard wind, short rain, and long hunger. To the clerk at the dock, it was just grain. To Lena, it was memory. It was proof that her family had survived one place long enough to try another. She came north by train, then wagon, until the land opened flat and empty under the Oklahoma sky. The soil was different. The heat was different. The wind was worse. The first year she planted the old wheat, most of it failed. So she did what farmers had done before catalogs and contracts and glossy seed bags. She walked the field and saved what had lived. The heads that filled under dry wind she saved. The stalks that stood after hail she saved. The plants that ripened before the worst heat she saved. She kept small lots separate, tagged them by year, and planted again. Every season became a test. Every harvest became a vote. The wheat changed quietly. It did not become uniform. It became stubborn. Some plants were shorter, some ripened early, some carried darker heads, some yielded less in a good year, but refused to disappear in a bad one. That unevenness was the point here, but refused to disappear in a bad one. That unevenness was the point. A uniform field could look perfect until the one thing it could not handle arrived. Lena's wheat looked messy, but its weakness was never all in the same place. Lena passed the seed to her son. He passed it to Ruth's father. And every generation kept one rule: never plant the whole farm to anything that came out of one bag. Ruth heard that rule before she understood it. When she was 12, she followed her father through the old field with a flour sack tied around her waist. He would bend over one plant, ignore the next 10, then stop at another and cut the head carefully with his pocket knife. "Why that one?" Ruth asked. "Because it stood." "But that one is taller." "Taller is not the same as tougher." Later, under a yellow bulb in the pump house, He spread the wheat heads across a door laid flat on two sawhorses. Ruth watched him sort like a man reading a letter from the soil. "This is not nostalgia," he told her. "This is a record." "A record of what?" "What the land has already survived." By the late 1970s, that kind of thinking made him sound old. Certified seed was everywhere by then. County agents talked about improved varieties. Seed dealers promised higher yields, cleaner harvests, predictable height, predictable maturity, predictable profit. Farmers were not fools. They saw the numbers. The new seed produced more bushels in an ordinary year, and an ordinary year was what everyone hoped the next year would be. Ruth saw it too. After she married Paul Calder, they planted commercial wheat across most of the farm. They had bills. They had equipment loans. They had children to raise. A farm cannot pay a mortgage with sentiment. But Ruth's father insisted on keeping the old acres. 67, he said. Paul laughed the first time he heard it. Why 67? Because that is how much your great-grandmother could walk in a day when she was old, Ruth's father said. She said a seed field should be small enough to know by foot. So they kept it. Every year, 67 acres of uneven wheat stood behind the pump house, while the rest of the farm followed the market. The neighbors called it Ruth's Museum Patch. At the co-op, men joked that she was raising wheat for ghosts. One afternoon, a farmer named Dale Whitcomb leaned against his grain truck and shook his head at her. "You know that old stuff is costing you money." Ruth smiled. "Most things worth keeping do." Dale pointed to a new bag of treated seed in his pickup. "This is the future." Ruth looked at the printed label, the bright logo, the perfect promise. "Maybe," she said. "But I don't like a future I have to buy back every spring." The joke stayed a joke for years. Then Paul got sick. The medical bills came first, then the short crop, then the tractor repair, then 2 dry summers that seemed to remove mercy from the sky. By the time Ruth buried her husband, the farm was no longer just a farm. It was a stack of deadlines. She planted commercial wheat on 400 acres because she needed yield. She planted the old 67 because she could not bring herself to stop. That spring, rain came at the wrong time. Warm nights followed. The wheat looked good at first. Too good, some people said. Thick stands, soft air, leaves wet every morning. Then orange dust appeared on the lower leaves. The extension office called it stripe rust and told farmers to spray. They did. The planes flew low over the fields. The chemical smell hung in the air for days. It slowed nothing. The rust climbed. It crossed roads. It moved through commercial fields like a match through dry grass. The new varieties had been bred for yield, not for this exact enemy. And because so many farms had planted similar genetics, the disease found the same open door again and again. Dale Whitcomb lost 540 acres in less than 3 weeks. He drove to Ruth's place one evening with rust on his boots and no expression left in his face. He did not come to joke. He stopped by the fence behind the pump house and looked at her old field. The difference was almost cruel. Across the road, his wheat was orange and collapsing. In Ruth's field, the heads still nodded green under the wind. Dale climbed through the fence and knelt between the rows. Some plants were sick, some had scars, but others were clean, more than enough to carry seed. "What did you spray?" he asked. "Nothing different." "What variety is it?" Ruth looked at him for a long second. "My family's." Dale pulled a head of wheat through his fingers. The kernels were firm. He swallowed hard. "You understand what this is worth." Ruth looked toward the house, where the bank letter waited. "I understand what everyone is about to lose." Dale stood up slowly. "The companies will come." "They already called." "If they offer you a fortune, take it." Ruth did not answer. Dale's voice broke with exhaustion. "I'm not saying it because I like them. I'm saying it because you're one person, Ruth. They've got labs, lawyers, trucks, distribution. You've got a seed chest and a foreclosure notice." Ruth looked over the field. "That may be enough." The first offer came the next morning. The second came the day after that. Canyon Ridge Genetics checked into the motel in Weller and stayed. Grant Hollis returned with a larger number and a softer voice. This time the offer was $5.5 million, plus a consulting title, plus the promise that Ruth's name would remain attached to the line. He laid the paper on her kitchen table as if it were kindness. "Mrs. Calder, we are not asking you to disappear. We are offering to make your family's work permanent." Ruth read the first page, then the second. She did not understand every legal phrase, but she understood enough. Exclusive development rights, licensing control, protected germplasm, enforcement. "What happens to a farmer who saves seed from it?" she asked. Hollis folded his hands. "They would be required to purchase certified seed through authorized channels." "Required?" "Yes. Even if the seed came from their own field. If it contains protected traits, yes." Ruth looked out the kitchen window. The pump house stood in the yard, sun-faded and leaning, with the old seed chest inside. "My father used to say there are 2 ways to kill a seed," she said. "You can let it rot, or you can lock it so tight no farmer can reach it." Hollis sighed. "With respect, your father did not live in this disease environment." "No," Ruth said. "He helped prepare for it." The woman from the company leaned forward. "You cannot multiply enough seed to help people quickly. We can." Ruth turned back to her. "I'm not arguing that you have more machines." "Then let us use them." "You don't want to use the seed," Ruth said. You want to own the door it opens. That was the first time Hollis lost patience. You are facing foreclosure, he said. The county is facing crop failure. This is not the moment for a symbolic stand. Ruth pushed the contract back across the table. It stopped being symbolic when Dale's field died. A silence settled over the kitchen. Outside, tires crunched on gravel. Hollis looked toward the window. Dale Whitcomb's truck rolled into the yard. Then another. Old pickups, seed trucks, a flatbed with a cracked windshield. Men and women stepped out slowly, the way farmers step out when they have already had the worst news and no longer need to hurry. Hollis stood. What is this? Ruth walked past him to the pump house. Inside, she removed the canvas from the cedar chest. The smell of old wood and dry grain rose into the hot air. She lifted sacks by year, by lot, by the handwriting of people who were gone. There was not enough seed to save everyone. Not yet. But there was enough to begin. She filled small canvas bags, tying each one with butcher's twine. She wrote instructions on paper torn from a feed ledger. Plant separate. Save from survivors. Do not blend everything. Share only after harvest. Dale came through the pump house door and stopped. You sure? He asked. Ruth held out the first bag. No, she said. But I'm sure what happens if I don't. Hollis stepped into the doorway. Mrs. Calder, you are giving away millions of dollars. Ruth kept filling bags. No, she said. I'm giving away seed. There is a difference? She looked at him then. There is if you farm. By sunset, the first bags were gone. Nobody left rich. Nobody left saved. Married home was not a miracle. It was a beginning small enough to fit behind a truck seat. The next spring, 26 farms planted test strips of Ruth's wheat. Most were small, 2 acres here, 5 acres there. Some failed, some crossed badly, some yielded low. But in field after field, part of the wheat stood through rust pressure that damaged the commercial varieties around it. That was how the old seed had always worked. Not perfectly, not cleanly, not like a lab promise printed on a bag. It survived in pieces. By the 3rd year, county growers were trading seed from the strongest strips on a bag. It survived in pieces. By the 3rd year, county growers were trading seed from the strongest strips. An extension breeder helped document resistance without taking control of the line. A small cooperative formed to clean and distribute the wheat locally. Ruth insisted on one rule written into every packet: save, select, and share. Canyon Ridge never got the exclusive rights. The bank did not forgive Ruth because of morality. Banks do not work that way. But the farm survived. The cooperative paid her modestly for seed cleaning and foundation lots. Neighbors helped repair the south fence, sent her a combine one harvest when hers broke a bearing 2 hours before rain. Within 5 seasons, the old wheat had spread into 7 counties. It did not replace every commercial variety. It was not always the highest yielder. In easy years, it looked unimpressive beside cleaner, taller, more uniform fields. But when rust came back, farmers noticed the difference. The old wheat did what Ruth's father had promised a record could do. It remembered. Years later, people would ask Ruth why she refused the money. They expected a grand answer, something about courage or sacrifice or being against corporations. Ruth never gave them that. She would take them to the pump house instead. The cedar chest still sat against the wall. Inside were cloth sacks with new tags added every season. Some had Ruth's handwriting, some had Dale's. Some came from farms she had never owned and families she had never met. She would lift one sack and pour a little wheat into her palm. "Money leaves when it is spent," she would say. "Seed leaves and comes back multiplied." Then she would close her hand around the kernels. That is why the chest stayed unlocked. Not because Ruth hated progress, because she knew progress that can only survive behind a fence is not survival yet. The wheat kept growing because one farmer knew the difference between selling a crop and selling tomorrow.